Disclaimer: the information and education material contained herein is meant to promote the general understanding and dialogue of GAN's processing. Such information is not meant or intended to serve as a substitute for a healthcare professional's clinical training, experience, or judgment. For patients and individuals, such information is not to be a substitute for professional medical, therapeutic, or healthcare advice or counseling. For medical issues or concerns, including decisions about medications and other treatments, readers, viewers, listeners should always consult their physician or, in serious cases, seek immediate assistance from emergency personnel. Prescription information, procedures, and use of medical devices information should be undertaken only by properly trained and certified medical personnel. We specifically disclaim any warranties, express or implied, including implied warranties of merchantability or fitness for a particular purpose. Such information is provided, as is, and is believed to be accurate at the time of its publishing, but it is the viewer's job to evaluate the accuracy of any information found in this presentation. Every case presented is of their own experience, applied by themselves for themselves, and it applies to their case only. Every person experiencing health problems should seek professional medical advice and consult their course of treatment with a doctor. The processes of plasma balancing described herein are a natural process which supports the body but does not replace medical advice or therapies one is already subject to.
Thank you very, very much for this, and let's see if we can move on to the next level.
There it is.
And what a beautiful Sunday afternoon it is in some parts of the world. And I want to welcome everybody here. It's a very important time. We say that every week because it is, and because we are seeing the changes. And so these changes are very, very important for whatever we're trying to accomplish. And so we need to know what we're trying to accomplish. So let's not make any mistake about it. The KAKT Foundation is all about bringing peace to this planet and to the universal community, and therefore to the universe. And why not? What is wrong with peace and prosperity? This is the KAKT Foundation Spaceship Institute teachings on plasma science. We're in the advanced transmutation series. Today's topic is color integration. My name is Alexander. I am from Canada. It is December the 22nd, 2024. And this is part of the KAKT Foundation North American Plasma Education Series. Well, it's hard to believe this is the 6th in a class of 6 with respect to advanced transmutation, which we started way back in 2020. And we see a series of advanced teachings. But please remember, all of these are really, really very basic. It's just to help us more. So making sure that the mature students have an ability to present in their own way and in a different way, offering many opportunities to describe what it is that we're doing and still try and make it welcome for the new knowledge seekers, because we have over 6,000 hours of teaching, and that's not even an accurate guess. But today we're going to be talking about color integration and what exactly that means. And it's a continuation of what we talked about last week, which was color density. So we have to understand that we're on the hesitancy highway. That is the lowest energy state. And a lot of people don't understand that there are different energy states, and some are lower and some are higher. And we happen to be in the physicality in the lowest. And so we try and sweep our lack of understanding under the carpet, but there's nothing to sweep and there's nothing to put under the carpet. We have to remember that we can't put the cart before the horse. The horses have eaten all the apples. And here we go from cartwheels to color wheels. We have to ask, is it skill or is it luck? And how deep is skin deep? What does that mean? We often think of that as only referring to beauty. So our search for outer space is really seeking the gravitational merging to the plasma highway, to our little pie in the sky. And as we say, our little pie, well, why is it always our little pie? You know, what about the rest of the universe? And why are we always so happy with the smallest section? And so we find that there actually is a pie chart of prejudice. And this is limited by the speed of light, which limits the transmission. And we often wonder where we are. Okay, but, you know, maybe we also have to wonder who we are, because the speed of light has variable transition. And the question really is are we disconnected from the source? And we know that we have differences. Some of us are black, some of us are white, and some of us are in between. And then the rest of the universe, well, that's just light years away. So we measure everything by light. But is that what happens to our little tiny world? We cut it up according to the light. We have this prejudice. I want this pie. I don't want that pie. Can I have another pie? Can I have another piece of the same pie? Or maybe I just want it all. And can you really do it? Well, let's see what the Earth has to say, because the Earth has this periodic table of prejudice. And in that table, we have details. And this is in the Earth space range. And these details really amount to a lot of elements. And each of these elements are organized very nicely. This chart is nice colors, but it's also numerical. And this numerology refers to density. And without showing the full range on this table, we are now discovering that there are more elements beyond what we see on the periodic table of elements that we've seen in school. And there are more elements on the periodic table of elements in the universe. So we don't have all the periodic table of elements. We don't have all those elements here. There is another periodic table of elements, which is of a different kind of prejudice. And so it's not an earthbound prejudice. And we wonder about this prejudice because when we look at the zodiac reference, we see a different kind of pie. It's still a round pie, but this pie has 12 pieces in it. And each pie is 30 degrees. And that's how we figure it out, that there are 360 degrees in this pie. And 360 degrees is a nice even number. So the key reference here is that it's circular. It's a field and it's all encompassing. The fact that it's about 26,000 years to go around this pie, yeah, well, that's, you know, that's just the way it is. So what do we see? We just see our captured field. And to capture that field, we have eyes. And when we look at our eyes, the eyes are white. And there's an iris, and that is colored. And then there's a pupil in the center, and it's black. So we literally have all the colors of the rainbow and all the colors going from white, which is all colors, to black, which is no color. And we all bring it together in this captured field. And that's what we see. That's our field. That's our little piece of the pie. And that's all there is. So, you know, enjoy it. However, you know, we've had to take a different perspective. There used to be a company called Kodak, and it used to make photographs. But these photographs were actually positives. And the positives had all this color. And the positives were created from the negatives. Now, where did the negatives come from? Well, the negatives came from the camera that you used. And so that film was developed, and a negative was created, and then light was shone through that negative to, shall we say, create a positive. And that positive was printed, and that was the business plan. And we did that with pictures, we did that with film. And so that was a very interesting thing until we got into the new graphics revolution that we have now. The point I want to bring out to you is that in order to create the photograph, we created it from a negative. So we're talking about something in an opposite pole. And for years and years, this is the only reference we had to opposite poles. Now we see there's night vision. And what night vision is kind of an opposite polarity, isn't it? Because this is a police camera trying to catch down burglars who are trying to run through a forest at night, which of course is very difficult to see at night. So in order to see them, they had to use night vision. And that night vision was the opposite, like a negative. And what is interesting, the dark areas, that's the ground. The lighter areas, well, the vertical light areas, well, those are the vertical people. But they are not as bright as the four culprits that you see. They are really bright, bright white. And those are the horizontal people that are running away with their goodies that they stole. And so, of course, that gives the law the opportunity to enforce the law and restore the peace by being able to track them and catch them. And another area that we look for tracking and catching, of course, is in X-rays. Now, the interesting thing about X-rays is that we can't see them, but they have a gravitational field effect. And in that process, they have a materialization effect. So in other words, things that are more dense, we can see with X-rays, and things that are not dense, well, we don't even see them. So for instance, we can see the heart, and we see that the heart is materializing before the brain, but we can't see the blood. And this blood is coursing through the body. And interestingly enough, it doesn't course through the brain, it goes around the brain. So there's a difference. But still, the X-ray is a negative, if you will, and it can see right through you, and hopefully you're positive. So we discussed last week about paints, and so we took an acrylic paint and we put it on a canvas, and this is what we could see. We could see the physical colors of the paint. And we all did this when we were children with our finger painting, and we blended the colors together. And we see that we could overlap the colors, and by density of the paint, we could develop through certain techniques, we can create a form. And we used many techniques, and that's part of the learning process. And then we came up with this image, which is a picture. And the paint, of course, reflected the density. And then, of course, these colors were all overlapping. And it's a real problem for our vision, isn't it? Because our eye moves digitally. But the picture is an analogous blur fill. Who does the filling? Well, obviously, it's the brain. The brain is interpreting the digital movement, but we all know that there's a gap in between each digital move. And so we really have adapted to the digital world. But the problem with the digital world is it's in point form. And life doesn't work like that. Life is analogous. So we find that this is kind of contrary to the image of the world that we see. So we make these things up because we have that skill. And that skill is based on light manipulation. And the only light manipulation that we seem to acknowledge is the light that we see. And so we manipulate that light through diffraction. We scatter the waves, or we converge the waves. We can focus them. There is a subject like refraction, reflection, and yeah, we can bend the light. And so this is all part of the teaching of Marin Tevakoli-Kesh, as we see in book number 1, The Universal Order of Creation. And we see how these matters come together, and some are very colorful, like our color palette, and some are kind of dark, and some are kind of strange colored. But they all come together, and they give us the image that we have of this universe. And this image, well, came from somewhere. So book number 2 talks about the structure of the light. And did we know that the light had a structure? Well, we found out last week that the structure of light is based on the density. So that's one of the components of the light. We know that the light has various colors. We know it has different attributes and different characteristics. And we all know that it goes from here to there. And the only proof that you need is to grab a flashlight, put some batteries in it, and turn it on. And you will see how you can create light. And then book number 3 is The Origin of the Universe, which is kind of strange because you take the one point, you split it up, kind of the way you do with the scattering of light, but it doesn't just scatter anywhere. It seems to converge in our little perfect tiny world and the sister universe. And of course, as per usual, we always get the short end of the stick. So our little tiny universe is the tiny part of this relationship. This is very unfair. And so we've tried for 357 weeks with Rick Crammon and the Universal Council to bring fairness and justice to the world by bringing the world peace. And the only way that you can do that and understand that is that we are one planet, one nation, and one race. Well, how do we do that when our Earth is a place of prejudice? But there are different kinds of prejudice. So, for instance, prejudice in terms of performance, in terms of conduct. And to help us with that, we had 10 commandments. And that was very prejudicial because there were 14 that were missing. And so that gives us 24. And is that all there is? Are there more commandments? Well, as far as the earth is concerned, you know, we pretty well got everything covered. We were having trouble learning all these commandments, and we seem to break them a lot. And now here we are a couple of days from the North American Christmas. And it's a time for peace on earth, isn't it? It's a time for goodwill of man. So that takes care of that one day. And it's the other 364 days that we have to worry about it, because all those days are on the plasma highway. And this is what we're trying to do. We're trying to get on that highway, but we find ourselves on the lowest energy state, the transmission highway, the physicality, and we relate that to the carbon 12. And we've tried to elevate to the transition highway, which involved not only just the carbon 14, but, you know, also the carbon 10. And isn't it interesting that the carbon 14 and the carbon 10 total up to 24? But when you go on the transmutation highway, the 14 becomes 16 and the 10 becomes 8. And there you go, 8 and 16 is 24. There's that 24 again. Very interesting. So we need to establish a good foundation, and every good foundation needs a cornerstone. Well, how do you get a cornerstone out of spheres? Because that's how the world is presented. Our world is round, but generally speaking, our homes are square or rectangular. But the color wheel is round, and so is the sky, and so is the rest of the universe. And so that's how we perceive things, isn't it? And it's kind of an anomaly because everything is kind of round and curvy. And yet in engineering terms, we like to have straight lines and sharp corners. So we see that we have choices. We have relationship choices. And what we discovered is that we have to go through various dimensions, but each dimension has dimensions. So if we're talking about the transmission dimension, which is comprised of the X, Y, and Z axis, those are your 3 dimensions, and they make a complete dimension. And we wonder how we get to the transition dimension. And we've evolved to get the X, Y, and Z axis in the transition dimension and complete that. And then from there, we get to transmutation dimension, which also has 3 dimensions, the X, Y, and Z axis. And the whole thing is, these are all just a medium. There's still a message. And what is the message? And so when we talk about the structure of light, and we say it goes from somewhere and goes to somewhere, does it only represent the duality? Well, how can that be? Because clearly we have 3 dimensions. So there's more. So if we look at these 3 dimensions, we can see that one dimension creates 2, as we see in book number 3. And these dimensions that are created are different energy strengths. So we have the universal field strength. We have the field strength of the sister universe. and we have the field strength of our little tiny perfect world. But our little tiny perfect world is cut into 3 segments, and only one of those segments is the physical one. And it's nice colors. And so that's the transmission dimension. And then to go between these 3 dimensions is a transition. And if we want to go to the highest energy level, then we talk about transmutation. Well, that takes care of that, doesn't it? So how do these different dimensions relate? And so we talked about the surface to volume ratios, and the most important thing that we had to understand is that there were 2 feeding dimensions, and they created a feedback dimension, which fed back to the feeding dimension, which in fact meant that the feeding dimensions had a duality. They were feeding and they were part of the feedback, because you don't continuously feed. You have to know how much to feed. You have to know if it's enough. You have to know what to feed. Are you feeding what is necessary, or are you just feeding for feeding's sake? You know, just to pretend that you're doing the right thing. Well, I eat a really good diet. Okay, so that's part of the feeding dimension, what you're eating. Is that the only feeding dimension? And there are other feeding dimensions. And so this is what we've always been discussing, because they affect us in our dimension, which is the observer dimension. And because we're not precise enough, then we fudge things. And that's how we got this pi. It's only 3.14 and a bit and a bit. And, you know, who really cares what that bit is? The 3 is the most important part, isn't it? So in the conservation of energy, we have these 3 states where we can travel from the matter-gen state and have a convergence based on susceptibility. And that susceptibility could arrive us at the atomic state, the nanostate, or the GAN state. And all 3 of these states are in the physical state. But, you know, we can go up and we can go down. And the point of the matter is that there is a balance. And so we always say it's equal. But, you know, a lot of people think that they're more equal than others. And so could we say that the GAN state, which is of a higher energy state, is more equal than the nano state, which is at a lower energy state? Yeah, if you were prejudiced. However, how do you create the nano state? Because there is a prejudice to create the nano state. And if you have this creation of the nanostate from the GAN state, then it can't possibly be equal. So something is either left over or it's gone somewhere else. And then the same applies if you go from the nanostate to the atomic state, but then the same applies if you go from the atomic to the nanostate. So wait a second. You can be equal on the same state, or you can be equal between states. And this is all based on magnetical and gravitational relationships. Okay, so, and then that's just the states. But how do you get to these states? So there's a transfer state, and that too has to have a convergence and a divergence. And it too is a two-way street. So this transfer state takes you to the transition matter. And from the transition matter, there's another transfer state, and that takes you to another state. So there are two transfer states. Two transfer states representing duality. And everything else that we've looked at is in 3 dimensions. So are you seeing what's missing? We'll be talking about that more in the future. And this is just to, shall we say, point the way. Because the creation of the universe was created from energy. It exists from energy. And since energy is always positive, then the charge, being positive or negative, isn't about the energy, it's about the motion of the energy and the direction. And the direction is very important because if you're based on the structure of light, then the light has to come from here and go somewhere. So things are working in combination. But as we found with the conservation of the laws of energy, you can go from state to state. So when we're looking at the combination, that combination could be within a state or it could be between states. And not only, but for simplicity, the plasma rule is the higher strength feeds the weaker strength. And in our point of view, we see that as a point of conflict. And it's true, it is a binding zone because it brings the combatants together. But it can also be a point of convergence. It can be, instead of a point of conflict, it can be a point of conflict resolution. And how do you do that? So how does nature do it? It becomes a point of containment, doesn't it? So when you look at your physicality, that's your point of containment. And it's created from energy binding systems. So that energy binding, that containment is self-serving. But when we steal it from someone else, then we create a problem because that person needs an energy binding for self-serving needs. And now there's a deficiency. And so there's a choice now to be made. Do they retaliate against you to try and get their energy back? Which of course they would have to expend more energy. Or do they draw more energy from the original source? Well, do we know that we do that? So how can we increase the amount of energy that we get? And so we found that the increase in energy comes from what we call synergy, where you get the bigger one plus the smaller one, and you can put them together because 1 and 1 is not necessarily the same one. It's not the same strength. It's not the same size. But so what you get is you could get more than the both combined. And so if we take this example of a truck with a trailer and add another trailer, we have a truck with 2 trailers. So 1 and 1 is more than 3, because you also have a driver and you have a load, and then you can bring more of that load. And when you deliver that load, you don't scrap the truck and the trailer, you reload. And so you're able to do this again. And that's what we're doing with the cups of life, precisely. We created a pattern in physicality, and we created a nanocoding process, which was part of the monatomic science. So not atomic, but monatomic. And we enlisted the services of the emotional strength and the strength of the inner core. And we developed emotional GANs and physical GANs. So we called one cup the emotional first cup and the second cup the physical second cup. But there are more cups. And so the first 2 were the cup of man, but the cup of man is part of life. That's why we call it the cup of life. And we were able to create other ganses, such as carbon dioxide and calcium, copper and zinc and water and amino acid, and even to create gold. And Fact of the matter is, we can create all the elements on the periodic table of prejudice, because the Earth, you see, is prejudiced, and demonstrates that because we could create the GANs of every single element on this planet. And you can see they come in different colors. And although some may look similar, there are differences in shading. So they are distinctive. They are distinctive as a fingerprint. And so these are the manifestations of the principal matter coming down as a magnetical force field and converging into our earthbound state, converging the principal matter, the transition matter, and the convergence matter into what we call the plasmagen. And there's a conversion of that plasmagen, but it's restricted to a plasma state until we take into account the earthbound state, which is also a maggrav. And so when we combine these two fields, we create a field interaction, which we call inertia, and we create another maggrav. And that maggrav could be our physicality. So in simple terms, these are the matter-plasma dimensions. And one is physical, and one is plasmatic. And the physical is gravitational because we can touch it and see it, but the plasmatic, which we call the feeding, is magnetical. We can't touch it or can't see it. But in both cases, we can sense it. So really, when we talk about the connections of the matter state with the rest of the life in the universe, we can see that the matter state is really an affirmation of life, because isn't it a convergence of all the matter state energies coming together, either in a plasma state or in a physical state, or both? But since we are what we call matter state dominant, then maybe it's not so much an affirmation of life, but a denial of life, because we're only seeing the one aspect of the life, and most of us are only seeing the physical part anyway. And so, you know, we're taught at a very early age, and, you know, when we do painting, and, you know, we want to bring all the colors of the rainbow together. So, you know, maybe we start with a blob of red, a blob of yellow, and a blob of blue. And, you know, when we mess them all up, we can create a color palette with 7 different colors, ranging from red to violet. And these are all colors that we use to paint with. And strangely enough, if we put all the colors together, we get this really murky brown color. So we're missing a few colors here. So for instance, we're missing black, we're missing white, and that's not the way our TVs are done. They work on a color wheel. And that color wheel is the combination of red, green, and blue. And although all the colors are here, and we say it's a color wheel, but we can manipulate this color wheel. Remember the light manipulation we were talking about. So one of the ways we can do that is by changing the effect of the red, green, and blue shading to go from 0 to 100. And if we have all the colors, we get white. And if we have no color, then we have the black. So this is not a painting. This is the light that's emitted from the monitor, the computer monitor, or the screen, or even the light. This is the light that you look at and absorb. So let's look at a picture. And so here's a picture, and we've decided to take the red out. Gone. We just have the green and the blue. And so we can see some images, and it's, it's kind of a funny color. And we only took the red out, which is only one piece of the pie. Well, what if we change things up and get a different piece? How about we put the red back and we get rid of the green? Well, what a wonderful picture that is. Lots of detail. Your eyesight. Okay, well, that's a funny pie. How about we take the blue out and we just had the red and the green? Oh, well, here we go. The red and the green give us yellow. It's a little bit better picture, but it still looks kind of funny, doesn't it? Well, what does the picture really look like? So let's put all the colors back. And now this is very realistic. There's a picture of a plane flying over a body of water with birds in the water. And this is a very, very plain Jane color. In fact, all the colors are balanced. And all the colors are there. We just started with red, green, and blue. And yet we got all the colors in the color wheel and the different shades. So what does that mean? So when we're looking at our soul positioning, what we're doing is we're taking the color in through our eyes, which is not paint, but it's color. It's light. It's the color of light, and it's absorbed. And our eye moves digitally, but our brain fills in the gaps and gives us an image. And so that image is a conversion. So that becomes not only a conversion, but a convergence, where we have this inertia feeding vision. In other words, all of this light comes together and feeds us. And then we have this plasmatic symbiosis of all the colors. And so this is what we determine as our physical reality. It's like the paint that we paint on a canvas. That's our physical reality. But oh, we know the truth. And the truth is that that physical reality that we see came from somewhere. And so the new truth is that there is a plasma reality. And what we're seeing is the interpretation of that plasma reality. And that's how we create the physical reality. So what is our aura? And so when we look at the soul of physicality, it looks like a color wheel. It has different colors. But we find that our aura encapsulates the body. And within our body, we have different parts of the body. Let's say, for instance, we have a kidney, we have a heart, we have lungs. Each of those has a field strength. Each of those is in a field containment. And all those fields are within the field of the body. So all of these fields are overlapping. And so all of these fields are representative of the colors to create this field. And so the topic today is the color integration. How do these colors come together to create the attributes of these fields? And what's missing? Same stuff is missing. Because we have all the colors. Not only do we have all the colors. But all of the colors represent all of the periodic table of prejudice that the Earth space has. And we share it. So we have, and we are composed of, all of the elements of the periodic table of the Earth. That's why we were born on Earth and not on Mars. And so when we bring all of the colors together, that color is white. That color is coming to us. One more color. How about the black color? So the only color that we really have on our body that is truly black is the pupil of our eyes, which means it's no color. So when you don't have a color, then you have nothing. So it's black. But when you have every color, it's white, but we don't see that. And we don't see the other colors that constitute our auras unless we have what we call clairvoyance. So in other words, that we can see the aura around the body and we can see the color. And then we can see the truth, whether or not that aura is white or whether that aura happens to be at some point red or happens to be at some point green. And why not? Because when we look at the gravitational conformation of the Earth, we find that the gravitational convergence of hydrogen comes from the interaction of the magnetical field of the sun, the magnetical field of the Earth, the magnetical field of the universe coming together. And it is specific. It is specific to hydrogen. It has a fingerprint, which we can see in the emission spectrum. The emission spectrum is specific to hydrogen. And it's specific to hydrogen wherever that hydrogen is in its physicality. And it's different from oxygen, which is gravitationally come the same way. But it has a different emission spectrum. So it is still showing a visible color spectrum. It is still showing a unique fingerprint. But the color integration is different from the color integration of the hydrogen. So if the periodic table of prejudice has a specific integration, what does that mean for us? Are we just a magnetical residue? The residue from the gravitational attraction of plasma fields interacting with the magnetical repulsion of plasma fields, the combination of a convergence and a divergence? We must be, because we are all independent and we're all variable and we're all interdependent on this universe, because it doesn't matter if you're more equal than I am, you're still on planet Earth. And it doesn't matter if you're more equal than I am, you're still part of the universe. And you are dependent on the universe. So you may think you're more equal, but you're just as interdependent as I am. And so how do we communicate with that? Because everything that we see comes through the pupil of our eye. So we find that we have this supergranular layer that encapsulates our brain. And it's only 3 layers thick. And those layers are all one cell. So it's 3 cells thick. So it's very efficient, isn't it? And what it is a transition layer. And that transition is what we have in our understanding of our physicality and what we emit. Well, how do you emit your physicality when you've absorbed all of this light and you've converted it and you've converged it, you've focused it within your light, with your retina, just like a camera. And so the image that you have is not only negative, but it's upside down because it's inverted in every single direction. And then if you emit, if you look at what you're doing in physicality, then you have to somehow project that. And it's got to be right side up. And it's got to be there for everybody to see wherever you are on this planet. So the earth is a physical manifestation, and each of us is an independent variable, interdependent on the earth, and each of us is unique. And if you're looking at this earth and you say, hey, where do you come from? Well, at 3 o'clock, I am so-and-so. But at 12 o'clock, I am so-and-so, someone else. And at 9 o'clock, I'm someone else. And since our clock has 24 hours in a day, there's that 24 again. So maybe 3 o'clock is in the middle of the afternoon and the light is shining. And maybe 9 o'clock is in the evening and it's dark. So we could say, well, at 3 o'clock, you are a shining person. And at 9 o'clock, well, you're kind of dark. But you see, the earth is rotating. So now you're kind of dark at 9 o'clock, but at 3 o'clock, you're going to be shining. So it's really hard to determine what you are, isn't it? Because we keep going round and round. So the earth keeps going round and round, but, you know, we go round and round with it. So what we see is where we are and what we are. And we see that by what we absorb. But if someone else is looking at us, then they're trying to figure out who we are. And if someone else is looking at us, and what we are is a convergence of this light and this energy, then at 3 o'clock, this is the energy that we get. And this is our little piece of the pie. Yep, that's my pie. Not your pie, it's my pie. But we all know that there are many pieces of the pie. And so, you know, there's a 3 o'clock pie and there's a 9 o'clock pie. But at that particular point, that's the convergence that I get. And that is the unique color that is converging, the unique gravitational confirmation of my existence at that particular point in time on that rotating sphere. And don't blink because I'm moving. So wherever I go, regardless of what I absorb, there is a field of containment around this world. And that field of containment takes into account the earth and everything that we see. And it takes into account all of us who are on this earth at the same time. So what we're absorbing is the gravitational confirmation. But what we have as a containment is the magnetical field around which is containing our little tiny perfect world. So we find that this attribute is just not individual. All of us share this. So all of us, regardless of what point we are on the earth, we get this gravitational confirmation. And so this confirmation obviously comes from some source and converges within our confirmation and gives us a unique, shall we say, fingerprint. And this is all comes to us as light. And then we manifest into the physicality just the same way that the earth manifests into physicality. But since the earth rotates around, we have different places on the earth, and we have different people in different places on this earth. And so each of us is an individual, and each of us is variable. And yet we are all interdependent on the same thing. And the reason 7 is so important is because that's the number of days in the week that we have. So, you know, it needs to fit, doesn't it? Story needs to fit. And so each of us have our own little piece of pie and say, well, you know, I'm in North America, or you're in Europe, and maybe you're in Australia. So, you know, each of us has our own piece of the pie. And doesn't matter how many times we rotate around, we still have our own piece of the pie. And, you know, we can move from piece to piece. And what do we have when we move to another piece? Well, we just still have that piece of that pie. So really, you can only have one piece of the whole pie at any one time. But it's not to say it's the same piece, because we can travel. Well, there was a story that was called Noah and his Ark. And this story was familiar to all of us in all 7 civilizations. So 7 pieces of the pie, 7 civilizations, same story. Same story. So the great flood, the great transgenerational wash, and it's been carried forward. And almost religiously, we all know that story, don't we? But it happened sometime. We don't know when it happened. Anytime you ask, when did it happen? We don't know. What do we base it on? And who knows, who cares? I mean, let's face it. The zodiac is 26,000 years, and the lifespan of an average human is 60 to 100 years, subject to misfortune or fortune, however you look at it. But what we do know is that all of this is created by light, and we know that because we can see a rainbow in the blue sky, or maybe during a rainstorm, it's kind of the gray sky. But then suddenly we see a rainbow, and we see that the blue is on the inside and the red is on the outside. But it's only within a narrow band, narrow range. And then there's beyond that range, the infrared and the ultraviolet. So it's still a color, but, you know, it's not visible. But one thing we know for sure is that we know that it is circular and goes around. And so there was a beginning point and an end point, and then, of course, there's an in-between point. And wherever it is on that point, it's the same attribute. The blue is on the inside, the red is on the outside. And so, do you pay attention to that? Because that is the light that we're absorbing, isn't it? So, when we look at something in the sky, we have to ask ourselves the question, is it a rainbow? Or is it a reflection? Well, isn't this strange? Here we have what appears to be another rainbow, but the red is on the inside and the blue is on the outside. Strange, isn't it? And so we talked about the holographic universe, which is an interpretation of light. And so when we look at the connections of our light, is it an affirmation of life or is it a denial of life? And when we look at a hologram, is that the image that we project, or is that the image that we see? And so they say, well, you've heard this before, life is an illusion. So what we're talking about is the blending of fields and how we take one field and overlap with another field, and we've learned how to create a black hole. Well, we have this hole in our eyes, so we're absorbing a lot of stuff. And we see that things come in combination. And not just one and one, but one and two and one, and more. And we have rotating fields, and they don't all rotate in the same direction. But there's one thing for sure about the rotation, is there's a curvature. And when you look at that curvature and we say, well, wait a second, we notice that there's a curvature in the rainbow. And sometimes that curvature is blue and sometimes that curvature is red. And what does that mean? And so we find that that curvature means density. And so the color that's coming to us, the blue is on the inside and the red is on the outside. But if it's a reflection, then that is opposite. Well, what happens when we change the medium? Well, then we have refraction. And they say refraction in physics is a change in direction of a wave passing from one medium to another caused by its change in speed. So, for example, a wave traveling in deep water is traveling faster than in shallow water. How do we know that? Well, when we look at the frequency of the violet, it is at a higher frequency, and it's on the inside. And the red, which is at a lower frequency, is on the outside. And so the higher frequency has higher energy and the lower frequency has lower energy. That's pretty standard. But there's a relationship to the wavelength. So the wavelength actually has to change to compensate. Why? Because the color of the light and the speed of the light have a relationship. So the speed of light is the same, but the color of light is variable. And so this is where the problem comes in, is when we're talking about the yellow submarine drifting in the sea of green, and then, you know, trying to elevate our understanding, we find that, you know, we are really in a really, really low state. We're stuck somewhere in between and trying to navigate all of this. And now we understand what color density is. So the refraction is a change in density. And the refraction is a change in wave speed. So the wave is a physical manifestation of the speed of light passing through the medium. So the wavelength actually represents the change in color. And if the wavelength changes, so does the frequency. So the frequency represents a change in color. And if the speed of light is the same, then the speed of light has to be the same in a density. Because we find that the color refracts the same in all cases. So the color and the light are the same. The refraction is not bound by the color. The refraction is bound by the density. The color integration is the same in a particular density. Now, why I'm harping on this is because I missed this point when I was going to school, because we always thought that refraction meant that the light would change speed. And so that's what caused the change in the angle of the light. But it was the change in the wave speed. Missed that point. So we can bend the light. And so as we talked about in 2 dimensions, basal surface to volume ratios, the negative is the higher surface to volume, so it has a higher negative charge. And the connecting point in between is positive. So if we take that straight line and put a bend in it, we have now created another dimension with a relationship of negative to positive. So the pointy end of the bend is negative and the dull end is positive. And we find that this is an important relationship between hydrogen and oxygen. And it doesn't have to be a sharp bend, it can be a curvature. And so we find that the hydrogen is negative, the oxygen is positive. There we are with that negative positive again. And we find the same thing happens with our alpha linolenic acid, which is an essential fatty acid. But this fatty acid is slightly alkaline. And what we refer to as omega-3, 6, and 9 are the bend points. And on these bend points, so as we know, the pointy end is negative, and there's 3 pointy points. And so we can create 3 hydrogens and connect it to the oxygen. And so this is how we create water. And so the essential fatty acid, of course, is in oil. So when you create the fatty acid, you also create water. And the oil and water don't mix. And this is a good thing, because otherwise you'd all be sitting in a puddle. But what happens when we have a double rainbow, and, you know, life is for learning. So wait a second. If we say the blue is of a higher frequency and it's on the inside, but when we look at the double rainbow, which is a reflection of the first rainbow, we find the red is on the inside and the blue is on the outside. And then you've got this gap in between. And you can see that it's of a different color. It's kind of a darker color, if you will. It's not really a color, it's just a shade. It's more shade. And so this is what people refer to as crossing the Bordeaux. You can travel along this band, and we do. This is part of the peace dome. And so we can decide, is this me or this is not me? And so because we're matter state, we say, okay, well, in the physicality, this is me. But, you know, once we die, well, that's not me. So we have a new philosophy. When you die, go home. and take your body with you. And so the matter plasma becomes a point of view. And our Earth point of view is the feedback. So we find that the double rainbows give us a dimension transcendence. This is the transmission zone, our feedback. But the feeding is the light. And that light comes from a source. And that source comes at soul speed. Soul speed, not visible. And it isn't in 2 dimensions where we say E equals mc squared, where the c is the speed of light, but we know that that's a relationship between the wavelength and the frequency. But it's not in 2 dimensions, it's in 3 dimensions. So this energy is equal to the mass times the wavelength times the frequency cubed. And if we believe that, there's still no accounting for the change in energy. All what we've accounted for is the mass. And so we see that the light has a mass. And if the light is a manifestation of the soul, then the soul has a mass. And so when we look at the convergence of all the pieces of pie around this planet, and we see how they come together, it isn't just red planet, and it isn't just a blue planet, but rather it's orange and yellow and green and blue and dark blue and purple. And then, of course, we have the gravitational force field in the center. And so we find that this is the transmission spectrum that we have from the non-visible speed of plasmatic rotation to the speed of visible transmission spectrums. So the transitions spectrum have a susceptibility, and that is between the surface superficiality, which is representative of our physicality, and the internal substance, which is representative of our plasma substrate. And so it's that narrow band in the electromagnetic spectrum, right in the center there, which is the point of containment, which is representative of the plasmatic interaction, which manifests in terms of physicality. This is what we can see. This is what we can touch. It's a manifestation of all of those colors, which are all representative of light, which comes together within that density at the same speed. And the maximum speed is the speed of light. And so the variability is based on frequency and wavelength and the integrity of the color convergence. But beyond that, there is no color that we can see unless we're clairvoyant or unless we're transmuting, which is really taking us one step beyond. And what we can see clearly in the magnetical side is that the bandwidth of the wavelength is much narrower than the bandwidth on the gravitational side. So we know that the gravitational side is stronger. And in that gravitational side, we go into the ultraviolet, the X-rays, and the gamma rays. And then there's another step beyond. So there's a step beyond the gravitational side and a step beyond the magnetical side. And this is all governed by the conservation of susceptibility. So we are all independent plasmatic variables where we have the relationship of the magnetical gravitational force fields on one side, representing the magnetical susceptibility, and the magnetical gravitational force fields on the other side, representing the gravitational susceptibility, and they form a maggrav. But what we're not saying is at what energy state We haven't decided that. This is just the conservation of susceptibility. So when we're looking at the nonlinear trinity, we can see that the different elements on the periodic table of elements, some are higher, some are lower, and there's a continuity. And it's in 3 dimensions. And there's a convergence of forces. And we can represent those forces through rotation. And we can represent those forces through color, whether the color is an emission or whether the color is a reflection. And when we put it on the transmutation quadrants, then we can find that there are magnetical and gravitational representations which take us from, say, the physical dimension to the plasmatic dimension. But there's a range as well. So these quadrants have different characteristics. And the integrity of those characteristics is based on either the absorption or the emission of the color into that field, understanding that it is constantly rotating, and as such is maintaining its position based on nearness and proximity to an adjoining field, because it's an interdependent universe. And so our color integrity then is based on what's inside. So then what's inside, which is the substance, is different from what is on the outside. And we've reviewed that. But let's review what's on the inside. Is it red? Is it orange? Is it yellow? Is it green? Is it blue? Or is it dark blue? Or is it purple? Is this what we see? What we see is on the surface. So is it true? Is that what's on the inside? Or would this be more representative of what's on the inside? Because we can't see the color. The color integration is all of those colors. Because the periodic table of prejudice on this earth is all the elements. And all the elements constitute all the colors. And we are constituted on this earth. So we are also constituted of all the colors. And when you have all the colors together, then that becomes on the white side. And we absorb, since we absorb all the colors, we can't see those colors. And that's on the inside. So what we absorb is all the colors. What we are on the inside is all the colors. And that's our gravitational conformation. So on the inside, we're no color, or we're all colors. But on the outside, the outside is a reflection of our emissions. And our emissions are kind of based on which piece of the pie we're born in, or which piece of the pie we have an affinity to. And can that be changed? So, realistically speaking, we are all an independent variable. And since our Earth is rotating, You may be light at 3 o'clock and you may be dark at 9 o'clock. But the 9 o'clock becomes 3 o'clock and the dark will become the light and the light will become dark. So that's not the criteria, is it? So when we go back to the beginning, and there were no planets, there was no atmosphere, and there was no water, we just had a field of energy. And in the beginning, well, you know, the sun had to be here before Mercury. And of course, Mercury had to be here before us. And then it went on and on and on. And as each one came on, then we were able to create more parts of the universe. So we created our own tiny perfect world. And we have a much bigger sister universe. And all what we see is our physicality. But our physicality is an amalgamation of the energy fields coming together and the convergence and being demonstrated by our gravitational conformation. And so in the beginning, that gravitational conformation was a neutron. That came before the atom, and it's from the atom, the splitting of the neutron, that came together. And the atom, of course, was a combination of the electron and the proton. And so what we find with the plasma science is that the mass of the atom, which is the combination of electron and proton, does not equal that of the neutron, and the difference is that of the balance of the PM tick. So the PM tick becomes a dynamic plasma. And we are a dynamic plasma. So I guess you could say that we are all kind of PM ticks, but we are co-creators where we can give from ourselves without consuming ourselves. In other words, I can give you a thought, but that doesn't leave a hole in my head. But I can't give you that thought on a plate. I can only give you that thought as part of the plasmagen state, non-physical. And so the integrity of that thought is based on the feeding that I give it. And the feeding that I give it is a convergence. And the way that is transmitted is with light. And as we know, there's a non-visible light and there's a visible light. And so within that state, within that density, all of that light is going at the same speed. So we have a color integration with a color integrity. In other words, within that plasmagen state, the idea that I create has a certain kind of integrity. And that integrity can be transferred to the physical state. So the physical state maintains that integrity of the color integration. So when we're talking about an interactive plasmagen state, it is in 3 dimensions. It has an x-axis, a y-axis, and a z-axis. And these forces are Magravs conditions, but they interact. And within that interaction, they absorb the color integration from the sources. And so in our Earth space transmutation state, we see the physical manifestation, which represents the color integration as it was in the plasmagen state, which therefore means that we can go from the Earth space transmutation state to the outer space transmutation state and still maintain that integrity based on the color integration. And when we say color integration, I repeat, the visible and the non-visible color. So our existence in terms of our physicality is the combination of all the colors on this planet. And the physical manifestation that we see is based on emission that we choose, which because we're all independent variables. But within our inner space home state, that inner space home energy state, we are all colors. So that's the color that we are. And that color is more than skin deep, because that's our true color. The color that we see in our superficiality, well, that's just a covering. So we're all the same color because we're all part of the earth. And so to be prejudiced based on the color that is reflected as opposed to the color that is emitted is one of man's faults, failings, and weaknesses. So the kind of planet that we have and the kind of planet that we create is based on our inner space home state. And so if our inner space home state has the proper color integration, then our emission can maintain the integrity of that color integration and emit it as well. So regardless of which energy state we're talking about, whether it be the magravatomic state or the nano state, the GAN state, the plasma state, or one step beyond, and one step beyond in all ways, all directions. So we find what we call the Coulomb barrier is the individual barrier which delineates the density state. And within that density state, the color maintains an integrity, but the integration of the color is all at the same speed of light. And so if we change the density, then we change the path. And we can have different paths within the same Coulomb barrier because, as you know, we have solid, we have liquid, and we have gas. And so we can maintain 3 different densities, 3 different dimensions within that Coulomb barrier. And then if we go outside, one step beyond, then we can have another density, a plasma density. And that's one step beyond. And if we keep going and we get further and say more than 3 steps beyond, we're operating in another barrier zone. And within that barrier zone, we can have a color integration with a color integrity But that color is based on light, which is operating at a different speed because we're in a higher energy state. And now we have an accounting for the change in energy. And that's why at the Sanya conference early in 2024, we were able to mine gold out of thin air. So we all have path choices to make. It's based on path link and susceptibility. So the emission of our intention is based on the emission of what we retain. And that interacts to create an emission of intention. And that intention has an integrity. And that integrity is based on this message feeding and a feedback manifestation, which we have to put up the antenna so that we can tune in to that transmission. And that transmission also has a transition, goes from station to station, doesn't it? So when you select one station or one force, and that is magnetical, it has to be balanced by a force of another gravitational force. And that resulting selection becomes the MAGRAV manifestation. So our selection process manifestation is predetermined. And all we have to do is create a peace dome of intention. And so the emission of intention affects the standard folding deviation and leaves no room for war. So the transmutation manifests in balance with the peace dome. So the plasma perception balance comes about from knowledge and wisdom, which gives us a deeper insight. And the experience will change a man's perspective. And it allows us to reflect on life. So this reflection can be converted to an emission. And you say, well, can you change the past? Well, reflect on your life and understand what could have been a very miserable experience for you in the past could have been the most valuable lesson that you could have learned. And in that process, you learned about artistry, you learned about organization, you learned about cooperation, and then you learned how much damage you can do with hodgepodge and discord and betrayal, and understand that that becomes part of your inner space. So it becomes part of your responsibility, because that responsibility is based on the speed of rotation, and it affects the transmutation transition because it's plasmatic. It's a convergence of all the rotating fields around. And each field is emitting a light, and the convergence of all of those lights affects the integration of that color field. And the transmutation of that integration is precise. It's representative of you and your pH MAGRAV. And those who are clairvoyant can see the pH of your MAGRAV aura. And the pH MAGRAV aura of the planet Earth is the blue planet. So the speed of rotation transmutes in both micro and macro. And so when we talk about the pH of peace, there are many points on the field strength of the dove. And we are all contributing to that. And we're all points in this field strength. And we're all independent variables. But we're interdependent. And so we've been trying for the last 2 months, and we have 1 more month to go on the transmutation test for nutrition and wellness. I'm sure many of you are enjoying it. It's another part of the transmutation training. And we need to do that because our goal and objective is to bring peace on this planet. And in that process is to bring peace and prosperity. And of course, there's much to research. And so we're offering a forum for all the top flight researchers in the world to understand that there's a new horizon, a new plasma science, and you can join the research teams and be part of the creators on this planet. You are already the creators on this planet. You just have to make better choices. Because as part of the transmutation, we find that the range transition transcends the z-axis transmutation dimensions, all three dimensions. And the laws of conservation govern the covalent, the trivalent, and tetravalent bonding attributes. And the containment requires gravitational tensity and mass, which is based on density. So the soul of man cannot be abandoned, and the soul of man cannot be compromised. The color of man is based on the integration with the soul of man. This is the integrity of man. And for 569 weeks in a row, we brought the Knowledge Seekers workshops to transcend the limitations of nuclear science and elevate into the plasma science, because it opens the door to the greater oneness. And, you know, they say the achievement of room temperature superconductivity represents a highly disruptive technology capable of a total paradigm change in science and technology. And this was broadcast to the world in 2019. And they were caught red-handed. This apparently was patented. So we have to understand that even if something is classified, it cannot be patented. It cannot be repatented. And if something has been already patented, it cannot be repatented. So you've all been caught red-handed. This is technology that's been around for decades. So welcome to the present, Christopher Columbus, discovering North America. Meanwhile, the Keshe Foundation Spaceship Institute teachings on plasma science is welcoming all the beautiful knowledge seekers to learn about the new selection process of the new plasma science. It depends on the World Peace Treaty because that's our mission. Sign it with a pen, display it in your home or office. Sign it with your soul. Sign it with deep meaning. Sign it with true intention. We see it, man, as a reactor of all the three-dimensional transcendent universe. We see there's no straight lines through the field transmutation. So can you go into outer space without a peace dome? Can we transmute through the dimensions of history? So we have a better understanding that the sphere creation combines the X, Y, and Z axis dimensions and the color integration. The color integration has a source beyond for physical transmutation dimensions. And the plasma science needs to be delivered daily by the Peace Dome in exchange for peace on Earth. And so this is not only the end of this lesson, but it's also the end of the Advanced Transmutation series. I hope you enjoyed it. And let's bring peace and prosperity for the other 364 days of the year as well. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you, Alex. Gosh, I wish I understood it the way you understand it, but of course, that's probably not completely possible. But let's go to our panelists and see if any questions has come up regarding this teaching or regarding the workshop or something that you want to bring to the table. Perhaps everyone's just reflecting on what was delivered. That was a tremendous amount of discourse on your end, Alex. Again, any questions from our panelists or participants?
Well, as you know, this was the culmination of a series of 18 classes, so that's one of the reasons, you know, try and bring all the pieces of the pie together, try and reconstruct it.
So how's your transmutation going? It sounds like, oh, I see a mic has come open. Sorry. Go ahead, Alex.
No, let's enough me talking. Let's hear what the open mic has to say.
Sure. Erm?
Yeah, there's something I haven't understood from elementary school on. And that was when we had art, we would mix the colors, and basically we were only given 3 colors and black, or rather, yeah, black and white, but these were on matter level, obviously. So with the 3, red, yellow, and blue, not green, we could mix any color in between. Because the red and the green makes orange, and the blue and the yellow makes green, and the red and the blue makes purple. Now, when we mix them as paint, they all turned brown. We all know that. But we did something else. We made a top, like a round piece of paper, and put a pencil in the middle, and then we painted just 3 colors on there, about a third or so of each, red, blue, and yellow. And when we would spin the top, we would only see white. So how does that work?
Please repeat that last sentence. You had the 3 colors, and then when you did on top, what?
When they rotated it. Yeah, that sounds very interesting, Erm.
You spin the top, and when you mix the paints as paints, it turns brown. And when you spin the top, you see only white. Because we were taught that optically, when you mix those 3 colors, they are white together. Try it. You like it.
And you ran this test yourself?
Oh, yes, repeatedly.
Oh,
that's why.
I wish I was in your class.
Well, you can try it. It always turns out white when you spin it.
Again, the 3 colors are?
Red, blue, and yellow.
Mm-hmm.
The 3 colors that you need to make all the other colors when you paint.
So you just leave those 3 colors on the pinwheel, and as you get to a certain speed, I'm sure at slow, when it's rotating slowly, you can see the different colors, but as it picks up, they create the white color as the speed increases.
Yes, you paint about a third of that wheel, that circle, each color.
Mm-hmm.
But there was no green, and when you came up with the green as being part of the main thing, and no yellow, I couldn't understand why that is, because in my experience, it was always red, blue, and yellow together would make white.
Well, Erm, you taught me something.
I was going to say, out of the mouths of children come wisdom, and she's no child.
No, that was Yeah, my dad was an art educator, and that was part of the color theory. And so that puzzled me always why that would turn brown when you mix them physically, but white when you mix them optically. Try it.
Yeah, but what you did change was the rotation.
Oh yeah, right. So the speed made it so you couldn't see the difference between them, but they all sort of appeared in the eye at the same time, kind of.
So the eye converted the color.
Yeah.
Whereas when you blend all the colors together on the paper is blending all the colors together.
Yeah, right. Try it.
Well,
Not right now, but later.
no,
Here's your assignment.
I think that's a wonderful, wonderful experiment, because what I've been trying to show is this is the result of the reflection. This is the result of the emission.
Yeah, I have no idea. That's
Well,
why.
by what you're saying is that if we were to take this color wheel and spin it, because look, you know, on the RGB monitor, the only things that you're adjusting are the red, blue, and the green. But somehow, some way, when you put all those colors together, you get white or you get black as well.
Yeah, that's what my dad would probably know how to explain it, but I never did. But I've done it many times.
I think her father was an artist, a painter, actually.
Yes.
Yeah, but in the plasma reality, what we can explain it as the difference between emission and reflection. Why the subject came up today, and more importantly, is because if let's say you're riding a bike and you know, you fall down and scrape your knee, so the surface color of your skin will disappear, so the under color will be exposed, and it'll probably be a little bit pink. You know, forget the blood, just the, you know, it'll be kind of pinkish. And if a black person were to do that, where the color of the skin would be scraped back, they would also be pink. And so that is obvious. We know that. So why are we prejudiced? Okay, because the color that we have in terms of which we base our prejudice on is the reflecting color. We don't base our prejudice on the substance, because if we did, then we would realize that we're all the same. If you're all the same, why would you be prejudiced? So the whole basis of prejudice is really based on a false set of principles. And
it's just that it's different. We're prejudiced against anything that's different from us.
yeah, but you know, of all the differences, that is the least different. You know, because like I say, beauty is skin deep. So what happens when you go beyond the surface of the skin? Do you get into ugliness?
I don't know.
Right? So you know, maybe I'm reflecting on my life and maybe some of the choices that I made, and maybe I was deceived by beauty.
Then we get into the question, what is beauty? Then we get into the question of aesthetics. That's another whole can of worms.
Well, that's an individual choice, isn't it?
Well, no. According to my art educator father, art is independent of the perceiver. The quality of art is a quality of its own.
You said
So-
it was independent of the perceiver?
Yes,
Okay.
that had nothing to do with taste, for instance. At least that was what he taught. And he ran into all kinds of trouble with the politics of art education.
I'm thinking he'd run into trouble with me as well because, you know, the art is dependent on the taste of the perceiver, and the taste is not in the mouth.
Yeah, right. But see, what was I say? The same with music. I can say that like different kinds of music have an effect, and it doesn't matter. Like classical music, cows give more milk with classical music, but do they have a sense of musical taste? Well, there seems to be some difference in classical music to junk music, what I call junk.
Okay, this is a huge discussion that you no,
Right, I know.
because the plasma science, plasma is based on the absorption of fields or the barrier of fields,
Yeah,
and you have a choice. Okay, so if you're playing the victim card, you're saying that you have no choice. And you know why this is such an important thing is because the word cult has come up, and it keeps coming up, and only because cults talk about mind control, and the environment is a form of mind control as well. And you can understand that, if you're in with a gang of thieves, you better think like a thief because you're not going to survive. Okay, but while you're in the gang of thieves, you have to think like a thief. But if you leave that gang of thieves and you go into an environment that is welcoming, then you can't survive as a thief. You have to adapt. You have to change. Now, the problem for a lot of us is we can't change that environment. Okay, so like I was saying at the beginning, he's a Californian, but he's been a world traveler. So, imagine if he takes his attitude that he had at California and then he goes to another country and he, displays that same attitude, and forget skin color, just attitude. We can discriminate by attitude, can't we? Right? You say,
Mhm.
oh, are you going to say, oh, you're that skin color, or you're going to say, oh, you're an American? You don't even have to look at him. You'll know he's an American. It's only when you look at him that you might say, oh, well, there's a difference. But, or what about, someone comes from England and they say they're English. Really? You speak English. I speak English. Mark speaks English. What about someone that comes from West Virginia? They them speak English too. So which one's English? So then it's not based on the language, it's based on where you're from. So that's another form of discrimination. And discrimination itself has become a bad word. So if you say, oh, I'm not going to discriminate against anything, then you're going to absorb everything.
Yeah, I don't think discrimination is a bad word. It's just if you discriminate and value people differently on certain parameters that are not valuable. But discrimination is something you have to do all the time. For instance, you have to see if the light is red or green. You have to discriminate between that when you want to drive safely. That's a form of discrimination.
Precisely. Huh? So you're someone who you only obey the rules of the red lights. You don't obey the rules of the green lights.
Yeah,
So
or like
you're prejudiced.
Yes, right.
So you're not going anywhere.
prejudice is fine as long as it's not on the wrong principles. Like I rent to people, and I cannot discriminate on a certain kinds of basis, like race, religion, handicap, or whatever else. But I discriminate all the time. The key discrimination I do, for instance, is whether I can communicate with this person or not. Like, does this person have a chip on their shoulder? It makes it very hard to communicate. You know, so I prefer to rent to people who share some of my values. So I discriminate on the basis of values, not religion, but on whether I can communicate, like they have the value of keeping things clean, or not turning the heat up too much, or whatever, or eating on their way down the stairs and spilling it all over the walls, that kind of thing. I discriminate all the time. I ask the people that I check for references, do they know this person? Is this somebody they would rent to themselves, or how do they know them? Whatever, all kinds of bases, but not race, religion, and not all that kind of stuff. But I'm not allowed to discriminate. I also discriminate, like I get a credit report that tells me if this person is in the habit of paying their bills or not. That's a major point, significant if you run a business. So, I discriminate all the time. I discriminate, like if I put something in my mouth, I discriminate whether it tastes like poison or not. That's what we have senses for. The word discrimination has been abused to be applied to everything. Like, you know, I check outside if it's raining or not. That's a form of discrimination. You know what I mean?
Music to my ears, Herm.
Yeah, I just don't discriminate on those things that are legally not allowed to discriminate on. That's what discrimination is supposed to be about. These laws about discrimination.
Well, if I can just take that one step further to add to what you're saying, there's a discrimination that we have between man-made laws and universal laws, isn't there?
Yes, that too. Yes, that's another thing, right?
Okay, so this is where the inversion comes into play, and so you know that has been the whole essence of the discussion, you know, for the last month or so.
Yeah,
it's this inversion.
Another thing, like my father as an art educator, he educated our taste. People either have an educated taste or an uneducated taste. Like if you have seen a lot of art, then you have a better way of comparing than when you have only been exposed to Walt Disney. When I grew up, Walt Disney was the epitome of bad taste. We weren't even allowed to look at that stuff. We were only allowed to look at real classical art and become educated by that. And my dad actually wrote books about educating taste and how to like we had to look at all kinds of catalogs of different dishes and silverware, and then we had to say, which one do I think is the best? And there was some kind of agreement. What was a better shape than other stuff? There was a balance in there. Yes, stuff like that. So, but he ran into trouble with the politics. He was in all kinds of debates in the literature, in the professional literature. But I understand where he's coming from. For instance, he did all kinds of drawings, felt tip pen drawings. Everywhere he would sit and draw. Then he had this whole collection of drawings, and then he would show these things to people, and people would pick things that they liked the best. And he found that the people with an uneducated taste still picked the best ones. They all picked the best ones. So what he did when he wanted to give people a choice of what they might like for a gift, he created two collections, one with the better ones and one with the lesser ones, because he said the people with a less educated taste are still going to be super happy to be able to pick something out of the not so good ones. while the people he found to be well educated with educated taste, they would really appreciate the top-notch quality drawings. You see what I mean?
Yes, for sure.
So
Go ahead, Herb.
I just want to get some feedback if I made myself.
Okay, I think Micah would like, stay on the line, Erm. I think Micah wanted to add something. I'm not sure how discriminating he's being. Is he still here? Yeah.
Oh, no, he's from the left coast.
One of your compatriots.
Thank you, Mark. And I wanted to comment, Irmgard, when you were talking about the difference between classical music and more regular, newer music. So there is a very big difference, and that is in how they tuned their instruments.
That too.
And they tuned it to a frequency of 432 hertz back in the classical music era. And then it got changed to 440 hertz, which if you would say it's the difference between discordant and melodic and beautiful in harmony with the universe, basically, in a nutshell. Yeah, I just wanted to mention that.
So that is a perversion, would you say?
Well, yes, absolutely.
They changed it so it doesn't match the human body or the human soul.
They've done experiments. For example, you take a drum kit and you tune it to the frequency of 440. They put sand on the drum and they hit it with the drumstick, and it came out as a completely discordant pattern in the sand. And then they tuned the same thing to 432, where they put the sand on it, they hit it with the drumstick, and it was a pattern, perfect symmetrical stars like in the cosmos, like that kind of pattern. Yeah.
So if you want your music to support your health, you should be tuning your music to 432.
Absolutely. And there are even now some actual performances and whatnot that you go see and where they actually do that, and the entire crowd is just in tears. They're just the emotion and energy that they feel from that music is a night and day compared to the other tunings. Yes.
Okay, one more thing to add to this. We probably all agree that there are values we have, and some values we consider higher, like giving instead of destroying
or taking.
That's also, but that's two sides of it. But I mean, there seems to be something that is absolutely better than other. So there may also be something absolutely better about certain kinds of art than other kinds of art. I mean, in all these classes, we learn form of ethics that's associated with this plasma physics stuff. If that doesn't, so that proves that there's a difference in quality, right?
So I had to get a new birth certificate recently when I renewed a passport, and I had to go to the town and I got a copy of the birth certificate. It said I was born at 4:32 a.m.
Cool.
Does that make a difference?
Probably.
I don't think so.
Well,
but to music,
you're in the right hertz frequency, Mark.
No, I know there's whole books written on this changing of the 432 to 440.
Yeah, but what I'm trying to say is there seems to be something that's absolute, not relative. Like in values, we have certain values that we really value as higher values than others. Right?
Well, of course, it has to do with peace, and peace is reflected in growth.
Exactly. So we discriminate.
We have to.
Right.
And of course, what's heaven to me may be hell to someone else. as Mr. Kesh said recently, with you feel a certain field from this entity, and it's very repulsive for you, but for that entity, it needs those fields to survive.
And why is that, Mark?
You'll have to ask the entity. That's the
Yes.
way it was created, I suppose, or has developed in that way. So I don't think, again, we can discriminate other than this is not what pleases me, or this is not what satisfies me, so I don't want to entangle with that perhaps field.
Perfect, perfect. But the question was, why is that? And that is because they are representative of the integration of the color that they are. And so when we're talking about their color, we may not be necessarily talking about the color wheel of visibility that we know. This may be in a different field, showing colors that are non-visible to us, but it may be visible to someone who's clairvoyant. But here's the commonality. You can always tell the color of the intention, because the intention is a convergence of the colors of the soul. And the soul is an extension of the creator. So it has to have integrity. Does that make sense?
Mhm. Yes, and something to add is like when I say I discriminate when I get the credit report or something like that, it is whether not I don't discriminate against poverty. I discriminate against the willingness to pay what they promise, to stick with their promise.
Oh my
I
God,
have-
you touch a nerve.
Because we have lots of people who really are too poor, really. So they can either get a cosigner, or I can do support a number of people who can't afford it, but only within our capability. But we do that also. So, I mean, I'm not a hard-nosed, just money person. But I am a person who wants to have someone who will honor their promises.
That is fundamental. And you know, when you say to honor the promises, you know, is that the promise that a soldier makes?
Yeah, when you make them.
Is it
Well,
done with honor?
yeah, well, that's why I never became an American citizen, because I could not give the oath to citizenship. Because it wasn't the promise I wanted to make.
Well, there is a promise that we all made, and that was the deal that we made that allowed us to be born. And just because we forget doesn't mean we don't have to work to remember it.
Well, you get really deep now, don't you?
Well, we got to leave the basics sometime. I mean, gee whiz, you know. Yeah, well, it's a public forum, and it's hard to, you know, it's hard to do. But we have teachers here that are representative of various continents as well. And you know, each of us is taking and what we can absorb, and what we can use, and using it to our benefit, and that's the whole point. So, you know, when we talk about teaching, I'm not teaching at you. I'm teaching to you. And when you engage, you're teaching me, and you're not teaching at me. That's a key point. And this is a natural skill, but it doesn't mean that it's been cultivated. So anything that you want, you have to work at it. But the comment that comes to mind is someone who said, it's very, very important to remember the people that you stepped on as you climb up the ladder. Because when you fall, they're not going to be there to help you. So our climb is not at the expense of others, but our climb is in cooperation with others. That's all part of the teamwork. But, if you start to discriminate by color, by race, by religion, then you are limiting the attributes of your team. And you're only limited to that particular viewpoint. And, if we want to be part of the universal community, we better understand that viewpoint. And that viewpoint does not allow warmongering. That's a fact. That is a fact. And if you don't know about that fact, you see what the GANTS does when you're being deceptive, and you see what the plasma fields do when you are, shall we say, a warmonger. It stops. It doesn't work. So the choice for them is not whether or not they want to advance into a higher field strength. The choice for them is they don't want to go into a higher field strength. That's the only option. So they would rather suppress it. Well, they're in the minority. And this is the thing, if we play by their rules, which is warmongering versus warmongering, we're going to be losers. We have to elevate our field, and we have to invite them to participate in that field because they have attributes that they can contribute. So they can leave their bad attributes behind. That's what their life lessons are all about. But they can contribute in another way because we're all part of the same creation. And I just want to throw one thing at you, since you've brought the subject of deepness, depth. If we look at the pupil of the eye and we see that it's black, so that means it absorbs everything that's part of the universe. And so everything that we see in the universe was created from the universe. And everything that we don't see, think about it, it's kind of black, isn't it? Makes you think that the entire universe, from our perspective, is a black hole. I'll end it at that. Thanks, everybody, for allowing me to continue presenting. I love this conversation. Thanks, Erm. Thanks, Mike.
But Alex,
yes.
We don't know what's on the other side of that black hole. Maybe it's white.
Of course it is.
Same thing with the melanin in the skin. It's all the body adapts to where you are. You take a person that lives in the deepest parts of Africa, they're quite they don't call them darkies, they call them blacks because that's the color that it is. Where the Negroes, what they call the Negroes, they're a different color. So, like with the racism, it's due to so many factors, but the melanin, everyone has melanin because that what determines the color of your skin, your eyes, your hair. And like you say, what color are we on the inside versus what color are we on the outside? And then what's the color of the soul?
And just a slight change of emotion changes the color.
Exactly.
Randy, I thought you said melon. Not
Melanin.
Melanin.
Yeah. So you know what's on the inside of a watermelon? It's pink,
Right.
just like we are.
But only when you open it.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it's black.
No, a watermelon is green.
No, but on the inside.
Oh, yes, yes.
When it's exposed to the light, she said.
Oh, that is so deep. Oh, okay.
Erm's on a roll today, guys.
Oh,
Yes.
She's well rested. She's well rested.
Had my coffee.
Wow.
See, my dad was in many ways like Mr. Kesh, just on different subject matter. Like he said, he wanted to give me a reward. He said, "Would you like me to show you something that nobody has ever seen?" I said, "Yes." I was just a little kid. "Oh, yes, sure." So he took a little stick and he broke it in half and showed me the ends. I was so disappointed. But it was something nobody had ever seen.
It was a good lesson because you remember it.
Yes.
See, I remember the blending of the colors because I really like finger painting class, but I never saw the spinning.
Yeah, try it. Please try it.
I am going to try it. I've got a power drill. I'm going to.
Doesn't even have to go that fast.
But the paint should be dry, right? Because if it goes too fast,
Right.
it'll splatter.
Yes, you can even use magic markers.
Yeah, I think that would be an excellent experiment to run, Alex. And again, the variable speed drill will again cause different colors to appear, I think, or perceived color or lack thereof. Okay, anyone else have something else they'd like to share or bring before we close? I'm going to play Keep Keshe Foundation Free for Humanity. And of course, at this point in time, volunteering or supporting the store is part of this whole work of keeping the Keshe Foundation free or becoming part of the transmutation testing sessions in other ways. But to me, this is the way. And of course, supporting with your soul the work that's going on in the background. So encourage all of you to choose one or choose all for supporting.
So what are you bringing next week, Mark?
What am I bringing next week? Well, whatever the workshop delivers, and hopefully we can get a little bit of that or a taste of it. Obviously, it's too deep to cover all of it and to explain it all, which I'm not even at that point, but we'll try to share whatever the soul leads me to share, and hopefully others benefit from it.
I will endeavor to be here.
Good.
Yeah, I will be in Mexico, so I'll try to come in, or I'll have to get to the recording.
At last I checked, Mexico is part of the civilized world.
Yeah, but we might be climbing a mountain or something. We're going to where the monarch butterflies gather next week.
And she's been told not to bring her laptop, as I understand it.
Well, I will bring something. But we don't always have internet either where we go.
That's okay. You can be here in Seoul work.
Soul level.
Yes, I will.
Wishing family and you a beautiful holiday vacation. We'll see you soon.
Yep, thank you.